So many variables you have to consider. I mean, you have the space itself, and you also have to consider the art, the pieces as a whole, right? So when you come in, it's really, you have to consider it as, okay, this is one big body of work, because it's amazing how some pieces will be affected by pieces that they are next to when being juried. And so it really is very different because the work's always different. But some things that I always tend to focus on when I jury a show, but especially a student show, because it is so diverse and you get so many types of pieces, is, and I think I included this in my statement too, but it's really kind of the implementation of materials, the diversity of materials, and really seeing that a student is kind of letting themselves, letting go of themselves and experimenting. And sometimes it doesn't work out. And, you know, there have been times that I've juried a show where there have been pieces, and in this case as well, there were pieces that the concept was there, the intent was there, the subject was there, but the implementation or the end product, I felt, just really didn't match the strength of what I thought the concept was. And so sometimes it doesn't work out, but that doesn't mean that, you know, you stop. I mean, you continue to, and the important thing is that you're experimenting and that you're pushing it. And so in this case, I kind of kept those kind of criteria in mind when jurying the show.
Yeah, it sounds like you came in and you kind of developed a concept after viewing all the works. Could you speak a little bit about how or what that concept became?
Sure. Well, you know, after the year that we've all had, not only with the pandemic, but in lots of ways, you know, in the political climate of the country, and in a lot of, you know, the racial politics and the conversations that we've all had about cultural inclusion and equity. I mean, I knew coming into this that there were going to be a lot of subjects that pertain to what we have been living in and around for the past year. And that is exactly how it should be. And, you know, I give it to students. I mean, these young voices are the ones that are oftentimes the first ones to step up and really address these issues. And so I knew that was going to be a really big majority of what I was going to see, and so I was correct. And so the concept didn't really, it wasn't really hinged, or it wasn't primarily based on those particular issues, but I wanted to try to include works that spoke to, you know, that multifaceted year that we've had, and works that really explored those conversations, and to see students who, you know, elevated their works to the level that those conversations are having in our day-to-day lives. And I think that's also in my statement. One thing that I really believe is that, you know, art should address these things, right? I mean, but you have to, in your work, you have to approach these issues as serious as you would in a conversation with someone about them. And so that means elevating your work and the implementation of your work to that level where your artwork is contributing to the conversation, not just being derivative of the conversation. And so I think that if I had to choose a concept for the show that always kept kind of reoccurring in my mind was, how are these pieces addressing and handling these very, you know, heavy issues and topics that they're trying to cover.
Yeah. So yeah, a lot of our students did submit work that kind of diversified the conversation. How do you reach, or how do you work to reach diverse audience within the context of exhibitions, especially working at the galleries at UNC?
Well, that's a little tougher. I mean, there's things, you know, again, like budget, there's schedules, And, you know, I guess I was maybe a little naive going into the position I'm at now at UNCC a couple of years ago. Um, I didn't realize, or at least I didn't stop to really think about how finite of a window of time you all have in an academic setting. I mean,
Mhm.
you essentially have 2 terms, but within that term, there are certain things that have to happen. I mean, you want to have juried student shows like this; they're great. You also want to have BFA shows. There are certain things built into that very small schedule that really kind of limits, or it doesn't limit, but it forces you to be more critical and curate the schedule more carefully than
Mhm.
you would at some other places. And so that's something actually I'm still learning. And I thought I was starting to get a grasp on it until last March when we
Mhm.
went completely virtual and had to look inward at projects and kind of focus on our own faculty and students to create these really great exhibitions. Um, but I think that within a university schedule, um, you also have a very diverse pool of audience that you're trying to interact with, and very specifically the students. And you know, you want to find artists who are addressing certain social and cultural issues that we're all living with, but in a very diverse way as to invite a number of voices to that conversation, and also voices that students can access, can interact with, can learn from. And you know, a lot of larger universities, especially those who have their own museums built into the university, you know, they do attract larger named artists, or artists that people may be more familiar with. And you know, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I tend to think that artists who are maybe still trying to figure, and not, this is not to imply that, you know, artists always have it figured out, but I think artists who are still kind of in that mid-career range, and especially artists who are working within a specific region kind of around that university, they tend to have a little, I don't know, closer rapport with students, it seems like. Um, and so actually one thing this pandemic has done is that it's allowed me to focus more on artists who are within this kind of southeast region. And a lot of that is budget based. I mean, going into next year, I'm not sure what our exhibition budget is going to be. So it actually makes sense from a budget standpoint to work with artists who are closer, who are in the region, more accessible, easier for us to work with physically, easier to bring into campus, and hopefully in the fall we can do that again.
Mhm.
But still within that, you have to always keep in mind that the students are really at the center of the audience that you're trying to reach, and finding artists who, whether or not they have a teaching background, but are very enthusiastic about interacting with students, who are very clear with speaking about their work, and who are also very open to working with us on developing workshops to involve students on campus. So that's become a big shift for me from saying working in museums for the past, you know, 10 years, where you know, the clientele, I mean, so much more of it is based on budget and money, right? And so a big
Mhm.
part of your audience is the general public, but also with the slice within the general public audience are the donors, are the people who are going to give to that museum, and you know, kind of also seeing to what they think, you know, exhibitions should be, or you know, working with the development team to work on different exhibitions that will attract financial support from the community. And in a university setting, we really don't have that, and it's really quite liberating that we don't. And focusing on, for me at least, focusing on the students and the educational component of exhibitions is much more rewarding.
Yes. Um, definitely like since the pandemic, we've had to totally do things differently. In some
Hmm.
ways, it has made things a little more accessible, like even what we're doing tonight, this educational
Right.
programming. You can stay at home and do this. And so that's been, something I've learned personally for sure.
Mm.
But to switch topics, let's talk about a little pre-pandemic. I want to discuss a little bit about outer space, the contemporary
Oh,
art
yeah.
gallery you co-founded while living in Florida. How did you find your position, or how did you find yourself in that position as co-curator?
So that's a good question. I haven't talked about outer space in a long time.
Yeah.
It's a good time in my life. So I was the curator of art at the Polk Museum of Art in Lakeland, Florida, and it's in Central Florida. It's exactly between Orlando and Tampa, and it is the art museum of Polk County. Polk County is one of the largest counties in the country. It's about the size of Rhode Island. That doesn't mean it has the same population, but in terms of area, it's huge. And the museum was based in Lakeland, which was one town in that county. But the county seat of Winter Haven was about 20 minutes away, and we had a lot of support from that town. A lot of our donors and collectors and even board members came from that town. And so we really wanted to branch out into that town a little more and to have much more of a presence and to try to bring a bit of the museum to Winter Haven as well. And that's also, without saying that there was kind of this rivalry between Winter Haven and Lakeland because you had, West Polk County and East Polk County, right? And, it was so we were trying to bridge our audiences in a way. And we had some really generous people on our board who were real estate developers in Winter Haven, and they had this building that had been this hobby shop for a long time that just went abandoned, and they purchased and actually donated it for the use of a gallery and kind of a residency space for local artists. And I partnered with a friend of mine, Trent Manning, he was from Winter Haven and had been kind of like a really known artist in town. And he and I they asked us if we would manage the space.
Mhm.
And so, of course, we were, yeah, I mean, we don't know where to start, but we'll figure it out. And so we knew we wanted to have kind of resident studios, and we also wanted to have a gallery in the front of the space. And so Trent needed a studio, and so he kind of made that his home base. At the time, I was kind of producing my own work, so I took a little corner of the space. And then we had two other spaces that, on about a 6-month basis, we would rotate out with different local artists who just needed a space to work in.
Mhm.
And then we also had a small studio space for student artists who wanted to come in to work.
Mhm.
Aside from the gallery portion, which was at the front of the building, where we curated shows of work by artists from St. Petersburg and Tampa and the Polk County area, but also Orlando. And it was a really rewarding experience. And unfortunately, we finally got that up and running about a year or so before I left. So it was really starting to get its own legs. And actually, they had just built a brewery next to it. So, like,
Mhm.
we were getting more people coming in because they would go to the brewery and then
Yeah.
so it was really starting to build itself. And then I had to leave. And Trent, he took it on as a solo project for about almost another year
Mhm.
before it just got so much for him to handle by himself. And so, no, unfortunately, it's no longer there.
Mhm.
But I think it was a really great learning experience for me because I had never been in a role of, building out and developing and managing a gallery and a studio space from the ground up.
Mhm.
And, it wasn't easy, but I think, and it certainly wasn't, we didn't do it for us. So it wasn't kind of a project that we expected to get a lot of, attention from, and we didn't want that. Um, but it was, I think, while it was there, I think it did its job really well and served the community and really brought art to that space and people from one side of the county to the other. And it was really hard to leave that, but I do consider it one of the greatest experiences I had in terms of professional development that I've had.
I love the name Outer Space.
Yeah. Well, we were kind of, I mean, that was really one of the hardest things to decide, well, what do we call it? And we were like, well, we're kind of out there, his art's kind of out there. And plus this is kind of beyond the walls of the museum. So we were like, well, it's got to be outer space then, right?
Yeah, definitely. So while you were there, you were a resident artist. Have you ever done any other residencies?
No.
Really? Okay.
No, I tried for the longest time because when I was an undergrad, I switched to art history because I saw in a catalog that I still had to have so many studio credits. So I fell in love with art history, but I could still take all these studio classes.
I did the same exact thing. I was originally a studio art major, took an art history class, fell in love, and switched.
Yeah.
But still, I still love to take studio classes. They're really, really fun when I can fit them in.
It was great. It's like the best of both worlds, right?
Absolutely. I loved it.
And then even through grad school and years after that, I tried to maintain some sort of practice. I mean, I would have a corner of my apartment that I would kind of reserve as my little studio space. And every time I moved, which seems like it was every year, it would just get smaller and smaller. And finally, I just realized one day that, I feel better if I use my creative energy in working with artists to help their visions happen and to work with them on exhibitions.
Yeah.
And I started seeing my work become either very derivative of work that I was working with by other artists, or I was comparing what I was doing with what they were doing, and it was really frustrating. And so I just decided that, I wouldn't give it up completely, but to kind of maybe put it on hold and just focus on, helping and working with other artists and kind of filling my creative juices that way. And it is a lot more rewarding for me to do that.
For sure.
Before we go on, I do want to stop. There was a question about questions, and I'm sorry, I meant to say this before, but if anybody has any questions anytime, feel free to ask. I mean, I like a conversational style, so I don't expect us to talk and have a Q&A after. So if anybody has questions, go for it.
Yeah, turn on your mic, turn on your camera, or just put your question in the chat, and we'll get those going.
I was going to say, and honestly, since you just talked about outer space, it'd probably be better if I asked it now anyway, because it's like that. So like there's like me and 3 guys that live all in Greenville, and all of them are kind of like working independently and stuff, and we have floated around the idea of like sometime down the line, like trying to design and build up a gallery space in Greenville, but specifically for, I don't know how to phrase this without sounding really mean-spirited, but people that care about like making something they're passionate about versus, here's a painting of an elephant and another one and another one and another one. So I was going to ask if you had any like very, very early like oversights that we might want to look out for, some information you guys wish you had known right out the gate when you started that, if we were going to do that, and especially since you guys did it from the ground up, and none of us have any experience outside of like, oh, we all like to sculpt and draw and stuff like that.
Yeah.
We've had experiences with gallery spaces, but that it's always, you got like one or two people that really care about the thing they're doing, and then it's like the rest. So I was like envisioning a space or in my town where I can kind of see those like aspiring creators and stuff come in, like basically what you described. I mean, that sounds like a dream, really. But
yeah, well, kudos to you for having that idea and following it, because I think that it's it is I think important to have multiple different kind of constellations of art galleries in an area, and giving more opportunity not only to artists but to audiences to see work, I think is really important, and only helps support artists themselves. the one thing that I can tell you, and especially after hearing what you just said about really looking for artists who aren't necessarily just Sunday painters, but 7 days a week painters, who are really serious about their work and are keeping kind of elevating their work and pursuing their work, is to develop a list of artists very early. I mean, even before you start maybe even looking into spaces, or I don't know where you all are in the process, but it's never too early to start putting a list of artists together, because that will give you time to not only look a little deeper into what they do, but also to connect with them, get to know them as people and as artists. And also, it'll give you the time to start building out exactly the shows you want to have. And it will also put something on their radar very early, too. But that's something I wish we would have done. I mean, going into that, we really relied maybe a bit too heavily upon our own contacts of artists. I mean, him being an artist, me being a curator. I mean, we did have a good kind of pool of artists we could choose from, but that doesn't guarantee anything. I mean, we discovered that even though you know them and you like their work and you all might be acquaintances, it doesn't guarantee that they want to have a show. It doesn't guarantee that they're very professional or timely with helping you organize a show. And so that's one thing that we always say we wish we would have done ahead of time, is maybe put the list together, curate it a little bit, kind of investigate those artists a little more. But also we didn't really have that time, because it happened and we were like, okay, we're doing this now. And we were so distracted about getting it open that we didn't stop to think, well, we should probably look at the artists a little more before we just start putting an exhibition schedule together. So that's one thing that I can really advise to do.
That's a good note. I appreciate it.
And also, I mean, if all of you are artists too, it's kind of nice that if you do have something that falls through, well, that can be just an opportunity for you, right? I mean, you don't want to show your work too often in your own gallery, but if you have a small gallery and something falls through, then you all put together a show of your own work. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that every now and then.
Having another option, because I have reason to believe I'll be in Greenville for the foreseeable future. But having an option for like another option in Greenville for like other college students in the area to show as well. And like other high school shows, because like Greenville Tech has like a high school show they do, and then they do like bring in artists from time to time, but there seems to be like very little of that, and I would love to kind of see that grow a little bit with how much the city just constantly grows, and it's like, hey, maybe stop making tire places for 5 minutes. I kind of want to
well, I mean, artists who are coming out of school, they need those steps. I mean, you all would be providing a space and an opportunity beyond, the college campus for students to really start focusing on their professional practice as an artist. And, there aren't a lot of those opportunities out there that aren't already businesses. Showing in coffee shops and things, that's fine. But to have a space, a smaller space that isn't intimidating, that's a community space where, especially a student who's just coming out of school and kind of wants to try their hand at an exhibition proposal, I mean, it would be so much easier and better for them to work with a space like you're talking about. And I think spaces like that really fill a big gap that exists in a lot of regions.
That's what I was going to say. I remember being like high school and like early college, and like it's like not having your work in a show, but like the first time you get it on the wall in a like professionally curated gallery, it's just, it really you see it a little bit more, and it really helps kind of get you there.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of space also offers a really great introduction for younger artists to a larger community, to the point where you start building your own community around that space, and those artists start feeling like they are a part of that community and are more likely to stay around and keep building on that arts community. And so I think that's, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of positives to starting a space like that.
All right, appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how much this happens at UNC for you under like a college context, but do you often collaborate with other curators or artists to develop exhibitions? Or have you before?
Yeah, we have before. I mean, not necessarily curators. I mean, sometimes, but I mean, so lately, well, lately, the past couple of years, I've really, the idea of having installation art, is just something that's really exciting to me.
Mm-hmm.
And we at UNCC, the spaces are a little dated. They're, they have their own character. They could be a little funky, in a good way. But that also kind of lends itself to an installation artist as this new space to create a site-specific kind of experience in.
Mm-hmm.
And so we've worked with a couple of artists here recently on some installation work. We're working with another one right now who actually is a Winthrop grad. We're working with her on an installation in kind of one of our smaller galleries right now. And then I had a conversation today with another artist in Richmond, and we're talking about creating an installation for one of the spaces. And so I think that those types of projects, I mean, every exhibition is really a collaboration with another artist. I mean, kind of, working with them on what their vision is. And my curatorial perspective is to involve the artist as much as possible, in order just to kind of make a show that really reflects their work, but also really reflects maybe where their work is going, which direction they're exploring now based on when we started this conversation, a year and a half ago.
Mm-hmm.
And so every exhibition is, I consider as a collaboration with an artist. But I mean, we really don't collaborate with other curators, or at least we haven't since I've been there the past couple of years. I mean, other than, to provide insight for a juried exhibition or something like that. But, down the road, I'm sure we'll do that eventually.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any advice for our students who are interested in working a gallery setting?
Usually the first thing that I always say to students who are really wanting to either work in a gallery or work in a museum is volunteer. And I know it's hard to do. I know there's just so much time in a day, and it's good to be compensated for your time and your energy. But really, what you're not paid to do as a volunteer, you're paid in experience, and you're paid in connecting with other people in the museum who you can use as maybe references one day, but also you can, at the present, just even though you're a volunteer, you can consider them a colleague, and you can talk to them. You can kind of get a better feel of, what is it to work in a gallery, or what is it to work in a museum. So it would build your experience while also kind of building your bank of contacts that will help you progress professionally. And interning while you're a student is always a good idea. I mean, it's always harder after you leave the program, right? Because I mean, first of all, your community that you've built over the past 4 years or so is now completely broken apart. You don't have that kind of herd that you've made this journey with. But I think it's important to take what you've learned socially in your art classes as well and apply it to everything you want to do after school. And that would be, volunteering in a gallery and connecting with the community and going to places, small community galleries or creative co-ops, or even going to museum functions and receptions and openings and things like that, just staying in tune and connected with an art community to the point where you start to become part of that community. And it happens gradually. It's not going to happen immediately. But those are the things that I would really suggest you doing, while also at the same time maintaining your own practice. Staying on top of your work, progressing your work. Not staying stagnant in one thing, but keeping, evolving your work and yourself as you grow older, gain more experience. Put that into your work, and allow that work to be its own thing over time, but while also kind of being the chauffeur for that work and being able to talk about that work. Learning through your experiences in galleries or museums how to present your work, because presentation is so important. So, I think to continue after school just involves, unfortunately and fortunately, a lot of time that you give in order to build yourself in the future as whatever professional art person you would like to be.
Awesome. I think my final question is, which I think is a question a lot of students ask during these talks. So you're a Virginia native. You went to Florida, and now you're in North Carolina. So what brought you to Charlotte?
Actually, the job at the Mint Museum brought me to Charlotte. I mean, I was down in Florida for about 7 years, and at the time, the museum was going through a big change in terms of its presence and identity. It actually, not long after I left, it became the Museum of Florida Southern College, and so the local college, which is right down the street, kind of absorbed the museum into their own art department. So it was really going through a big transition when I left, and I'd been there 7 years and just thought that it was time to move on. Plus, I wanted to get back to the mountains. I mean, nothing makes you appreciate where you're from.
Oh yeah.
More than leaving.
Yeah.
And so when I left Virginia, I'd been Virginia my whole life. I grew up in the southwestern part, went to undergrad in the central part, went to graduate school in Richmond, which is the eastern part, and then my first full-time job in a museum was back where I grew up. And so when I left there, I wanted to go either south or west, and so I applied to a museum in Florida, and I applied to a museum in Montana. And it just so happened that the Florida one was the one that I chose. And it was good. I mean, it was good experience. It was good to get out of my comfort zone, out of my geographic region, and to work on building relationships outside of, where I was familiar with. And like I said, it was just great to help me realize how important and how great it is up here in this part of the country. So the Mint was hiring an assistant curator, and I thought it would also be a really great experience to work under another curator. I'd never done that before. So I thought, maybe it's time that I kind of step back and be an assistant curator to work with someone else so I can keep learning and keep building my own skills. And it was a good experience. I was there for about 2 years. Really great experience, but then this opportunity at UNCC came up, and I've always loved being on campus. I've always loved working with students, and I've always said that it would be great to one day, be a gallery director at a university. And so, this opportunity came up, and so I applied because I couldn't help not to.
Great.
And it's worked out. I mean, I think that it's been great because it's also allowed me to continue building my relationships within the Charlotte arts community and beyond. The connections and relationships I've made at the Mint, I just kind of carried with me to UNCC. And I've still stayed within, that kind of creative community. I've only just shifted roles. And so it's been kind of a nice change, surrounded by the same people and the same community that I really fell in love with when I first came.
Wonderful. I think we have a question in the chat. Adam, would you please share with us your first art experience as a child?
Oh, that's Mitchell. I think Mitchell's heard this answer before. So what first made me fall in love with art was Bob Ross, and I know that sounds, sounds cliche. It sounds, I mean, he's kind of, in my mind, he's the art pop star, I think, because of just how genuine it is. But my father worked for the telephone company for 30 years. And when I was 4 years old, he, for some reason, signed up to take these Bob Ross instructional painting classes. And we lived in this small town with no stoplights, small, railroad town, coal mining town in Virginia. And, as kids love art, kids love to draw and sketch and role play. And so, I loved art as a kid. And when he did this, he would take me along with him to kind of the top reception room of our local bank, where actually the pastor of our church at the time was the instructor for the class. And he would take me with him, and I would sit there and watch the class. I still remember watching him, learn all of these different types of techniques. And then we would go home, and he had this little makeshift studio in the basement of our house, and I would go down there and I would watch him, kind of apply these techniques that he was learning. And for the first time, I think as a child, that made an impression on me because for the first time I saw my dad, who really before that never really gave any signs that he was interested in anything kind of creative, let alone, painting landscapes. And it also made me realize that, art is something that does have a lot of passion in it, and is something that you could do as a profession. You could do it as, not just a hobby, but it's something that could progress into a really serious way of life and a lifestyle. And my dad didn't do it very long. I mean, he may have done it a year, but that was enough to make an impression on me. And after that, I was completely enamored by the idea and the thought of one day, using this art as some sort of livelihood. And then, going to high school, it continued. And when I got to college, there wasn't a question. I knew what I wanted to study when I went to college. And it was really hard, but it was also really rewarding as a college student in the arts. And it's only kind of grown since then. And now I can live vicariously through all these great students who are doing these ambitious things in their classroom and their studios.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question. It's going to take a little turn. Ashlyn says, so going back to the beginning of the conversation about inclusion and diversity, how do you feel about making art on a certain political topic for profit? For example, painting George Floyd's face on something.
Wow, that's a good question.
It is.
I mean, kind of the kernel of that is, talking about the commercialism of art, right? And but in this case, it's a different type of commercialism. It's almost kind of taking advantage of an issue in order to make a commercial profit. And I don't know. I mean, I think that it depends a lot on what context are you making this work. For instance, are you involved with kind of a community nonprofit who's trying to raise awareness of these issues, and you're working with them to create this work, and they're paying you for your creative abilities and your time? I mean, certainly there are a lot of people out there who take advantage of these issues and create this work just to, say, sell on Etsy or something because they're trying to tap into the sentimentality of a person through images. And, that I guess that kind of affects more of their personal conscience than anything else. That just depends on what kind of person they are. But, I don't think it's all in all a bad thing. I think what you need to really be clear about is your intent in doing it. If you're doing it just for the profit, then, especially if you're very in tune with participating in this conversation, if you're doing it just for profit, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. But I do think that most people who produce work like that are not doing it just to make a profit. I think they are doing it as a statement, doing it to raise awareness. And, a lot of the profit that comes from that may not be monetary, But it's a lot of the profit is allowing yourself to be open and allowing yourself to contribute your creative talent and your voice to a conversation that we all should be involved in, right? So, that's a really good question. And I think going back to the idea of just general commercialism in art, it's interesting that it's not the same, or at least I feel it's not the same now as it was, say, even 5 or 6 years ago. And I think a lot of that has to do with social media being so prevalent. It's been interesting to see how commercial galleries have kind of pivoted according to social media platforms, because a lot of artists, they don't necessarily need commercial galleries now like they used to. And of course that depends on where they are and what type of donors they're trying to attract, or collectors they're trying to attract. But I think the commercialization of art has really taken a turn for the better, in terms to the point where the artist now seems to have a lot more control over that than, say, the galleries or the price tag or the collectors. So that's been really great to see, and we'll see, how that evolves. I don't know, Ashlyn. I hope I answered your question. That's a really good question.
No, you did. Thank you. I'm a biology major who
Awesome.
I guess you could call a Sunday painter. So I don't have.
That wasn't a derogatory term.
No. It's just, I was like, yeah, that's accurate. Yeah. But yeah, I just have never, I don't have many ties to the art, majors or community in general. So I was just curious. So thank you for your response.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right, I think we have time for one more question if anyone's up for it.
I was gonna wait a second because I do have another one, but I already asked one.
Go ahead.
It's a question I actually asked when they were interviewing a couple new professors at Winthrop, but it's something I ask at artist talks a lot. You brought up social media, and I was wondering if you could elaborate how you feel social media has either altered or shattered the illusion of the amount of work that goes into people putting into their pieces, because they're just exposed to so much of it, how it channels into frustration because they can't you see it popping up so rapidly and so much that, do you think social media is really hurts where's the question was in there, crap.
So okay, let me see, and tell me if I'm wrong, but are you kind of asking about how social media may kind of, first of all, saturate the kind of art sphere, or I guess we can still call it art world, but also how it might desensitize us because there is so much of it out there and it's so immediate, and we kind of lose the appreciation for the energy and work and the art object itself.
So yes, that was the lead into if you feel like it has really given people a wrong impression as to how much effort it actually takes to make something you're proud of or passionate about, how
well. I think that the people that has made the wrong impression with had a wrong impression to begin with. I think that sure, it has affected how we interact and interpret a work of art. I mean, like I said at the beginning, there's nothing like being in the presence of a work of art. You can't see something on a screen to really appreciate it or know the power, whether or not you know how it was made. I mean, being in front of a work of art that's a big portion of its power, right? And seeing it on a screen and scrolling through different images. I mean, I had an artist tell me one time that, and this was really eye-opening for me, but he said that we see more images now in 1 minute than a lot of people just 100 years ago would see their entire lives. And so it society and culture is so image laden that sure, there's a risk, I guess, of just being desensitized to it. But also, I mean, if you kind of flip and reverse that, it could also just be more incentive for us to seek out those experiences, to be in front of works of art, because we get so exhausted with screen time that and we become interested in this artwork, that it really motivates us in a strange way to go seek out this physical work and be in front of it. A good example of that would be when I was a curator down in Florida. I was working with these collectors in South Carolina, actually, and they were older collectors, and their focus was on 19th century landscapes, oil painted landscapes, pretty landscapes with the big, kind of contoured frames. And it was, there weren't well-known names. They were all beautiful landscapes, but they weren't by anybody that you would have heard of. They weren't landscapes that were really kind of noticeable, but they were really great. And the board at the museum at the time asked me that, they said, well, we're trying to attract younger people into the museum. We're trying to kind of, diversify our audiences. And one of some of the people that we really want to attract are these young college students. Do you think that an exhibition of 19th century European landscapes is going to bring in these? And I said, well, I don't know. That's something we have to see. It's an experiment. Let's find out. And it was amazing to see how many young people came to that show, because it wasn't on a screen, and because they could actually stand in front of this painting that had so much impasto and so much texture on the surface of that painting. I would walk in and students would be looking at a painting, but then they would do this and they would do that. And it was like being, wow, it exists. This physical object is actually in front of me, and I can inspect it for its physical qualities, and it's not on a screen. And so in that way, it does kind of motivate us to seek out those experiences more, perhaps. And also from an artist standpoint, I think it's all in how you use social media. I mean, I see so many videos now of artists who they do time lapse of the process, or they do these small little like vignette videos of them just painting, a small piece of the painting. And it's really exciting to see that, you're kind of watching part of the process as it happens. And so in lots of ways, it can actually bring us closer to understanding the process than allowing us just to forget about it completely. But I think that people who are who get the wrong impression and who really become desensitized to art because of that probably weren't really sensitive to it in the beginning.
I appreciate that. It's really easy to go straight to like, oh, social media is either so great or it's killing us all. So I appreciate that.
Oh, there are pros and cons to it, like everything else.
I just worry. I have friends in town that didn't go to school and stuff. They always, they want to draw and stuff like that, but they basically just sit there and they look through their Instagram feed all day. And he just, and I always want to shake him. It's like, dude, that guy spent 3 months on that. It's like he didn't just do it yesterday. He's been waiting to post it. He's got to put in the time. So appreciate it.
That's a good question.
Yeah, I think the Instagram, it kind of encourages art students to learn how to document their work in a really nice way, but also, I think there's a lot of pressure of like having to put that out there and then see everybody react to it.
Right. And like it or not, it's here to stay. I mean, social media is not going anywhere anytime soon. And so you really have to use it to your advantage.
Mm-hmm. All right, I think we're going to wrap this up. Adam, would you like to give any final comments? Do you have any events that you may be working on?
Well, I mean, I do want to say, and maybe I've mentioned this already a couple of times, but I was really impressed by how ambitious the work was for this show. I mean, as I said, so many kind of issues that we're all kind of coping with right now, and conversations that are happening. And, I really give credit to these students for really addressing those very honestly, and just being ambitious with how they do it, in terms of the materials they use, or the scale of the projects, the time they obviously took to make these projects, and the serious intent that is obvious in looking at these works. I mean, I was really impressed. And so I'm hoping to get down and seeing the show on the wall with the lights, that always changes things. But it was just a really great experience. And I mean, my hat's off to everybody who submitted work, because it wasn't easy. And everything I saw was off the chain. It was great. You are doing good stuff. You just have to remember to keep doing it. And roll with the frustrations, because they're going to be there. Like I said, volunteer, intern, even be a docent. Being a docent is really a great experience to talk about your own work, actually. But whatever you do in the art world, allow it to contribute to, and also allow, be fluid, allow it to kind of maybe dictate a little bit, where your comfort levels might be and what you might want to do in the art world or not do. But I just really encourage you all just to keep at it, keep your studios going, even after, you don't have those great resources at college, and stay connected with your friends you've made in college, create new contacts, create your own voice within your community, and just stay creative.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being with us tonight and being our juror.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you. It was great. I loved it.
Great. Cool.